Pleased to present Austin Faith Dialogue, brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries. In the weeks ahead, you will see these and other programs. Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program at the crossroads of religion and life, a series highlighting the cultural and social interaction between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTVC. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
When the United States reacted to the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, the religious community responded in a variety of ways. Some people baked cookies, others wrote letters. Still others gave their support. Some advocated peace in the name of God. Hello, I'm Valerie Bridgman Davis, pastor of Banah Full Community Church, and your host for today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. Today, my guests are among the peace advocates. Welcome to Bill Gilstrap, coordinator of the Peace and Justice Coalition, and Vicki Mencio, a member of the Austin Campaign for Peace in the Middle East. I'm glad to have both of you here with us today. I want to start today's conversation by asking how you got in the peace business. Bill?
Well, I started out in the church. I was raised in the Lutheran Church, and in my early 20s, I began to realize that I needed a concrete vehicle for my faith. I felt that I needed to do something outside of the church activities that would give me a way of expressing that. And in 1984, I began working in St. Louis with a group called the Freeze Campaign, and that was directed towards reversing the arms race and unbuilding all of our atomic weapons. When I moved to Austin, I had an opportunity to go to the Soviet Union in 1987, and that really helped me solidify a lot of the kind of work that I do now. I visited with the Soviet Peace Committee in Leningrad and in Moscow, and I began to realize that what the Baha'is say is true. What we all on this planet have in common is our humanity. And so today I'm a professional peace advocate, and I work for the Coalition for Peace and Justice. We have 38 groups in the Central Texas area, and in Austin alone we represent 4,000 households.
Okay, and Vicki, tell us how you got into the peace business.
Well, I'd always been interested in human rights issues, and when I was at UT, I became a political activist, and I worked on Latin American issues and the issues of racism in South Africa. And as time went on, I noticed there was a void in the sorts of political work that were going on around Arab issues like the Palestinian question, and decided to focus my work in that area. And that's how I started working with the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee.
All right. Well, today we want to talk about what's going on in the Middle East. We should tell our viewers, of course, that this is taped earlier in October, so we really won't know what will be happening when this is viewed. We hope for the best. We hope that there will be peace in the Middle East. I mean, that's what we can hope for. But I want them to know that straight up. While we're talking about that, though, I want to start with what you are not saying concerning the U.S. reaction to Kuwait.
Well, I think it's important to point out that we're not saying that Saddam Hussein's activities can in any way be condoned. The occupation and annexation of Kuwait and the taking of hostages are just so clearly indefensible as a violation of international law that we're all very sure that some pretty strong measures need to be taken against Saddam Hussein and his military presence in Kuwait.
And Vicki, you were saying earlier that you have some concerns about portrayal, media portrayal of the Middle East concerns, not just what's happening between Iraq and Kuwait, but the Middle East in general. So let's talk about that, and then we'll get into the meat of this.
Okay. Well, I think it's important when people are watching the news and they're watching little clips of Saddam Hussein that they realize that he needs to be judged on his actions, and which are horrendous, and not take the characteristic things of the Arab world and hold that against him, or use that to make him seem evil, because that is going to demonize the entire Arab community. And an example of that would be like how he has pictures of himself everywhere. Well, a lot of the Arab rulers do that, and that's not something that's just Saddam Hussein because he's an evil, egotistical person. That is something that's a cultural thing, and I think we need to distinguish those things when we criticize any political leader.
Okay, and you had some concern about language that is used to describe not only Hussein, but Arab people in general, like calling people mobsters, or, not mobsters, what am I trying to say? Mob, whipping up frenzy, kind of.
Right, yeah, when they show little clips of people in the Arab world that are demonstrating or protesting, they're mobs, they're violent mobs that are burning American flags and effigies of the president or something, when here they would be considered exercising a freedom of speech and that sort of right, and to make sure that we do allow those people to have the same rights of expression that we have here.
Okay. What are your concerns about what the U.S. is doing? We're talking about the U.S. particularly because we are in the U.S., so what are your concerns concerning the U.S. reaction in the Iraqi-Kuwait situation?
Well, Valerie, I believe that our government is pursuing a foreign policy in the Middle East that is seriously flawed because it doesn't take into account the tremendous social, economic, and political upheavals that we've seen in Central Europe and South Africa, with repercussions in China and, in fact, globally. And the policy that we're pursuing is still very much a Cold War policy. And as advocates of peace, I think it's important for us to announce that the Cold War is over, and that we need new political thinking and new strategies which emphasize diplomatic solutions and not always the immediate and incisive military intervention that has been our history. The strategic implications of 200,000 American troops in Saudi Arabia, numerous naval carrier task battle groups in the Persian Gulf, are that we're going to escalate this to a shooting war. And I'm very concerned that although we are now, as Americans, looking at what price we're willing to pay for cheap and affordable energy, I think we also need to begin to look at what price we will pay for energy in order to save lives.
So are you saying, don't let me put words in your mouth, that you see primarily this is an economic issue, not as much a human rights issue or military issue?
Well, it is both, and it's really a very complex issue. The UN Security Council has authorized pervasive and very strong economic sanctions against Iraq, and the international community, by and large, is responding to those. The United States, however, has also imposed a naval blockade, and that can clearly be seen as an act of war. And I just am afraid that things will get out of hand and we'll have a shooting war before some of the economic sanctions and the international non-military pressure has a chance to take effect. And of course, once this thing is settled and people are thinking back about it, it will be very difficult to argue that economic sanctions played a great role in it because of the strong military presence we've already exhibited. Mm-hmm. But I think it's very much true that as the world population increases, as trade barriers are relaxed internationally, we must begin to look at nonviolent conflict resolution. We must begin to uplift the concept of a community of nations, or this may only be the tip of the iceberg, this current crisis.
Vicki, you also work with the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee. I finally got that word out. Mm-hmm. You had some concerns that this will come around again. I mean, that even if the U.S. Wins, whatever win might be, that we're going to have another situation like this. Why is it that you think that is so, and what do you think the implications of what's going on is?
Well, I think the problem with dealing with any nation, especially one where they have a good or a service that we want, like oil, that we have to maintain some diplomatic ties with them. And if we always respond militarily when we disagree with them, well, we can be self-assured that it's going to happen again. And like Bill was saying, these people are armed, and they're armed on all sides to the teeth, and this could be very devastating to everyone. And we need to deal with these diplomats like diplomats, and not like necessarily like barbarians, or however we choose to deal with them at this moment.
Why do you think we see, and this may be a loaded question, so you can say, I don't want to answer that. Why do you think we respond to Middle Easterners as if they were, quote, barbarians? Is it because we don't understand their culture? I mean, what?
I think there is a lot of, there's enough ignorance on the part of the American people's side to Middle Eastern culture and to Islam, certainly, that we do use that as a shield. We can get away with it, the strong arm policy in this case, and we think that we will use the difference in cultures as a way of making it more acceptable to the American people.
The other thing I'd like for you to talk about, Vicki, is you are in touch with the Arab American community here in Austin, and I presume, you know, in the country. Talk about how they seem to be experiencing this current U.S. involvement and what is being said there.
Well, the Arab Americans that I know condemn what Saddam Hussein is doing in Iraq totally, and they have no reservations about that. And but they also feel very strongly that they, because of their dignity and their self-esteem, that they can handle the issue without having to bring it to a military point, especially with interference from other countries. And I think it's really important to note that the Arab community should have a very serious voice in what happens here, as it could alter the entire Arab world.
I think Vicki's right. There's something missing in the way we approach this, because we're not allowing for self-determination in the Middle East. We, as an American who reads the newspaper and gets confused every day doing it, I haven't been seeing editorials or news pieces which even mention the Arab League, much less uplifted up as a legitimate body which can, in fact, find a diplomatic solution to this thing. So I think that non-intervention and respect for any people's right to determine their destiny is something that we need to begin to look at a lot more strongly.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about the economic implications. Now, not being politically savvy as perhaps some other people, I look at this situation and say, this is about oil. I mean, I'm just telling you what I see. So since I say that, and there are probably other people out there who say the same thing, what do you think we as U.S. citizens, and certainly our government, might do to take the pressure off of the need for foreign oil?
Well, there are a lot of things we can do, and they began to be addressed when Mr. Carter was president. We can look at renewable alternatives with energy, solar, wind, geothermal. There are a lot of strategies that really aren't quite economically feasible from a cost standpoint yet, but we aren't positioning ourselves to take full advantage of them if the price of oil does in fact go up. And the economics of this are, I think, somewhat ironic. If we are in the Middle East largely to protect our oil interests there, then it seems ironic to me that our action is actually increasing the price of oil to the American public. Saddam purportedly has invaded Kuwait because he wanted $25 a barrel oil instead of $21 a barrel of oil. And now the price is bouncing around near $40 a barrel. And in addition to that, the U.S. government has already spent $2.5 billion in the region. And we have real security needs at home that continue to remain unmet. We need to build new schools. We need to modernize our industrial infrastructure. There's a critical need for the American labor force to become trained in the new technology to a greater degree, we will not have a competitive labor situation into the next century if we don't have skilled labor that can operate the new technologies, and the multinational corporations will simply go elsewhere. So I think our security needs lie more in our domestic problems than in our international policies and our interventions in foreign affairs.
Do you?
Yeah, I think another point about the oil is that we may have to come to terms with the fact that it's not our oil, and we are not guaranteed the right for cheap oil forever. And so it's very important that we look at alternative energy and maintain good diplomatic relationships with the people that we do buy oil from.
The United States owns, in the United States, 4% of the world's oil reserves, and yet we and the northern tier of nations and in Europe and in Japan consume over 45% of the world's oil reserves. And so I think it's kind of arrogant for us to assume some kind of sovereign right over the Middle East oil. We may need to consider that the Kuwaitis need advocates in the international community, but that oil, as Vicki said, simply is not ours to defend.
I want to bring us locally to Austin. We can talk about what's happening in Kuwait, but we can't really do anything about it in Kuwait. So I want to talk about what you're doing with the Peace Coalition here. Both of you are part, by virtue of the groups you're in, of that coalition. And I want to read this quote from the pamphlet, which is, "If you want peace, work for justice." And I asked you before if this was a faith statement. Do you want to talk about what this statement means? And then I want to talk about the coalition itself.
Well, for me, I can see it as a statement of faith. I make things very simple for myself. I try to strive for the ideal of a fundamental desire to do the right thing. And if I do the right thing, then in that right action, I cannot harm anyone. So for me, yes, working for justice to achieve peace can be seen as a faith-based statement. Now, the work of the Austin Peace and Justice Coalition is multifaceted and varied. We have, as I mentioned, 38 groups. We have environmental groups, gay and lesbian rights organizations. We have people who are very active in creating direct aid involvement for Americans in Central America, actually sending medical supplies and tools and bicycles and things like that down to Central America. We have other Central American activist groups who are trying to influence the political process to create a better situation for Central American communities. So we have a very vast and varied number of groups. Our current projects involve a solidarity campaign against racism, and we're doing a lot of that kind of thing on the local level. We work with the Stephen Biko Committee on the University of Texas campus. We have, as a member of our coalition, the Texas State Coalition Against Apartheid, and they are active all over the state, and particularly here in Austin as the state capital, in trying to get our state government to refrain from using South African steel, for instance, in highway projects. So we do a lot of local work, and we try to do that work with a global perspective.
What is it that you're asking Austinites to do with regard to the Iraqi-Kuwait U.S. situation?
Well, I'd like Austinites who feel that we may be making some mistakes in the Middle East to communicate with their congressional representative, with their senators, and express those beliefs. I think there are a lot of very concrete and affirmative actions we can take. For instance, people who are able could not drive their car one day a week, and that would lessen the need for oil in general, and especially foreign oil at this time. Everyone can look inside their life and find a way that they can do something to improve this, and that will give them a sense of power over this situation, which for most of us may seem rather hopeless at this point.
Something to add to that, I'd like to see people locally and internationally feel like they can say, no, a war is not an acceptable alternative, instead of say, oh, well, there may be a war in the Gulf. And you see a lot of that these days. The media has almost taken it on as as an acceptable end. It's inevitable and it's going to happen, and people need to realize that's not it. We have not exhausted diplomatic ties with these people, or diplomatic dialogue, or economic sanctions, and we need to proceed with those methods before we go into these harsh conditions.
I told you both that we would talk about this as we came to the end. What do you say to people of faith? There are a wide variety of people who disagree with you, obviously. You know this, I don't have to tell you this. What do you say to those people who, for their own faith beliefs, or believe the president is doing the right thing, or whatever, with regard to the Middle East crisis or any other crisis as far as that goes? What do you say to them?
Well, Valerie, I respect that there may be a legitimate difference of opinion in the faith community here in Austin, and if people have opinions which are contrary to mine, I'll try to convince them that I'm right, but I'm not going to ram it down their throats. I think that it is true that if we speak our own truth and then get off of it, the right thing will happen as a result of that. So if people feel truly that there is another way of looking at it, then I would encourage them to speak that truth as well. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. So,
did you want to speak to that, Vicki?
Well, I would like to say that for people of faith, that it's always hard to say that if you get involved in a physical conflict, that you will result in an end that's permanent. I don't think that's true. I think it's an expensive Band-Aid, like I said, and we'll have to fight this battle again. And if we can respect their rights and their dignity as human beings and try to deal with them that way, that I think we should be able to be more successful with them.
When you started in the peace and justice business, okay, did you realize that it would be this big, Bill? Did you understand what you were getting into?
Well, I didn't see all of it. I'm real excited that I have a lot to do right now. I think that I took some actions and had some thoughts which have resulted in the way it is for me right now. Sometimes it seems very overwhelming, but it's also given me a lot of faith and a lot of hope that we can create a better world, and I feel much more now than I did 6 years ago that there is a power and a certain rightness in all people everywhere, and that if we can organize that and promote it as the will of the people, that power and that peaceful power of the people will not be denied. So I really feel much better about it today than I did when I started.
Sorry, let me see if I understood what you said. Are you saying that for the most part people are manipulated by governments, and if the people's will really was done, that we wouldn't have this situation, not just this situation, but anywhere the destruction of lives, the possibility of the destruction of lives is so total and so pervasive?
Yeah, I don't think that all of the things that are wrong in the world today are a result of a flaw in the human spirit. I think if we can lift up that spirit and give it its voice, that we can create a better world.
And Vicki, did you want to speak to that? Did you know what you were getting into when you...
No, I honestly had no idea that this has turned into a lifelong struggle and commitment, which I am glad of and glad to be doing it. But I was always, you always think there is an end. You've started a project and that there is an end, but to this sort of project, there is no end.
There is no end to this sort of project. Okay, I wanted to go back to something you said when we were talking earlier, and you said that the escalation of what might happen in Kuwait is phenomenal because of the militarization of the area, people having weapons. You made the statement, we're not throwing rocks at each other anymore. You want to talk about that?
Well, it's very frightening to me because obviously America has incredible military technology, and the Iraqis, I suspect, are not far behind that. So if a shooting war does start, it's not going to start at the level of throwing rocks. There are sophisticated weapons out there, incredibly and unimaginably devastating weapons, and the conflict will likely begin at a near-nuclear level. And the potential for that in the loss of lives of innocent people in that area of the world is just tremendous. So I think we need to look at that, and maybe in our media we need to start lifting up a true picture of the people there and not always show them in military uniforms with a pistol on their belt, and not always emphasize the posturing and the name calling and that kind of stuff, because there are human souls over there, and if a war starts, there's just going to be tremendous destruction of life.
Vicki, I know that is, close to your heart, the making people, the humanizing of the situation. Do you want to speak to that?
Well, I'd like to say that those weapons are not cheap. And we always seem to think we've spent so much. How can we spend more? And the oil-producing countries are spending most of what they produce from their oil on weapons. And those people are living under conditions that are not much better than they were before they started pumping that oil. And it's a shame to see that, and that we are also suffering from the economic loss of that money that could really help our societies and build universities and hospitals and, and bring people up and out of their poverty.
Do you really think that the economic sanctions will work, Bill?
Well, of course I do. We're searching ships, and that's more of a naval blockade, but we're also seeing a great deal of cooperation worldwide in terms of people just stopping trade in Iraq. And Iraq doesn't have a tremendous industrial base. They import most of their products, and if the economy becomes bad there, as I spoke before about the will of the people in Iraq will lose their loyalty to Saddam's policies, and change can be created from the inside in Iraq as a result of these sanctions. It may take longer, and it may be more difficult to see the full results, but if we give economic sanctions and non-military strategies a chance, while at the same time opening up a good dialogue for a diplomatic solution, I think that this thing can be brought to some type of closure without shots being fired, and that's really what I'm hoping for.
We're almost out of time. If you could say one thing to President Bush, what would it be? Vicki?
It would be that economic sanctions do work, and a military option has too many negatives.
And you, Bill?
Well, I think I want President Bush to know that I'm praying for him, and I'm blessing his intellect, and I hope he knows something I don't know. Okay.
That's a good note to end on. And as we come to a close of today's discussion, I do want to thank Bill Gilstrap and Vicki Mincio for their insights and participation. On behalf of Austin Faith Dialogue, I'm Valerie Bridgman Davis, thanking you for watching and inviting you to join us this time next week. Peace.
For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-76